walk up to me on the aircraft carrier, the George Washington. So that brought back a lot of memories.
What does it mean for you, Secretary Benson, to be here?
Well, it brings back all the memories of a country totally united in a cause. From factory to farm, Rosie the Riveter, women more engaged in the workplace than ever before, 250 airplanes being built a day, incredible, a ship a day. The country came together to back the fellows that went overseas to fight in the war.
Do you think an event, an invasion such as D-Day, could ever take place again? Certainly no one would want it to take place, but is there the national will, or has American
Katie,
society changed?
there wasn't the national will then. You know, they just carried the draft by one vote. But once our country was attacked, it came together immediately. And you had the consensus. And those kids then were thought of as lazy, as undisciplined, a bit like we hear about them now.
I was going to say, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, that many of them were not particularly ambitious or patriotic, that they considered themselves kind of slackers.
Some of them, that's right. But, you know, Hitler thought that about our youth, that they couldn't do the job, that they were a democratic nation, no discipline. But yes, absolutely. I think they'd come together again if this country of ours was ever attacked.
You had a pretty harrowing experience, I understand, during the war over the Adriatic. Is that right?
Which one?
I don't know. I just, I just know that apparently you had a pretty close call.
Well, what you would have, you'd have planes blow up in front of you, find yourself flying through the debris, looking for parachutes, praying to God you weren't next. You'd start down a bomb run, measuring 6 feet. By the time you got to the end of it, you'd have shrunk to 5 at least. You saw boys growing into men awfully fast. You saw a teamwork, a pulling together. It was a pretty tough experience.
I understand that your role in the war really changed your career path, that you probably would have gone into business had it not been for the war. Is that right?
Well, I went to the Congress, and then I quit because they were paying us $12,500 a year, and I had a wife and 3 children. I just couldn't cut it on that. And then I was in business about 16 years, and then I decided I want to go back into public service.
Did the war have an impact on your decision to change?
Of course it had an impact, because it showed me the democratic process and what it could do, and when we were up against the kind of terrorism that they saw here in Europe with Hitler. So it had a strong impact, where you wanted to make a difference. You know, people can teach, and people can heal, and people can preach, but in public service, you touch so many lives.
Before we go, I just have to ask, you know, so few people in the White House today have ever had military experience. Do you think that impacts the way decisions are made in the foreign policy arena? And do you think there's something disturbing about that? No,
I don't think it's disturbing. Because I just think back to World War II, how things changed overnight. Those people hadn't had the experience either in the White House at that time. So they were brought together, and they'd be brought together again. And you have people now that this president of ours is, I've never seen a fellow that has studied a subject as much as he studied this one. He steeped himself in the history of the World War II and what brought it about and how we came together.
Secretary of Treasury Lloyd Benson, thanks so much for talking with us, although today we'll call you Major Lloyd Benson.
All right, fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Fine.
And that's all right, and we'll be back in a moment with more on Today, right after these messages.
En votre nom, en l'honneur des vétérans, je m'excuse.
You like food. You get Heartburn. You take Maalox.
For our buddies and whatever.
What about you, Carl? What'd you think?
I had some pretty strong feelings about it, Brian, on going through it. Basically, it's the same. You still have to obey the laws of physics when you parachute. The technique is different now, but I had pretty much some of the same feelings.
Looking back on it, was D-Day either the worst day of your life or the best?
Well, I don't think it was the worst. No, not that particular day. I think Bastogne was a lot worse in that it was such a continuing cold that just sapped your strength and will.
Part of the Battle of the Bulge?
Yes.
What about you, Dutch?
The Bulge was bad, too. They were bad days in any of them.
Really? You don't make any distinction among them?
No, because there was a lot of other bad days, too. You know, as they come along, you never could pick them. You had to take what you was dealt. There was bad ones in any battle.
I asked this of both of you. Have you any feelings about Germans on this day? Are old enemies new friends, or do serious feelings still remain?
No, we never hated the Germans. I didn't.
Let me elaborate on that a little bit. I've been followed around the last few weeks by German television who came through and followed the C-47 we jumped from over here from PDK Airport in Atlanta. And I had met an old trooper from the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment some years ago, and we used to slug it out. Just Holland, Bastogne, Central Germany. We always hit the 6th Fallschirmjäger. This fella had more combat time than anybody I ever knew. But he was a survivor. And he, on his own, decided to look after the German KIAs, the MIAs, look after those people that didn't come back and their families. We sat down at his coffee table in 1988 and says, no more war.
Old enemies, new friends.
New friends.
I ask you this. What's the one thing you'd like people watching at home, thinking of these ceremonies, to come away with?
Well, it was a satisfaction for me that I'm still able to do it. And the reason, there's something in your heart that's there, that's all.
What's the one thing you'd like them to come away with?
Well, I just hope it proves something to the young people that wars just don't make it. Compete in athletics, economics, entertainment, any way you want to, but don't compete in war. It's just such a loser. If you look down at this beach and those crosses, you ask yourself if it's worth it. In the long term, I'd say, yes, it was worth it, but you just don't want to pay that price again.
Price. Carl Beck, thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Good luck to you.
Could we thank Continental Airlines for flying all of us troopers over here?
You just did.
They flew us over here free of charge both ways, and we got a free run.
And you didn't even have to wear a chute. Unbelievable. We're going to come on back in just a little bit. We got more ahead after these messages.
Roses, I want roses. That's it. One stinking lousy bug-eating rose.
You know, orthosystemic rose and flower care can help.
Oh, yeah?
It fertilizes and protects against bugs. 2 jobs in 1 simple step.
That's all it takes?
That's all it takes. Ortho Rose Care. 1 step to gorgeous roses.
Ah, yes. 1 step. Did I mention I love roses?
Ortho. You're working too hard without us.
Summer's just about here, but don't panic. If you get on the Ultra Slim Fast plan today, you could lose 10 pounds in a month. The plan's easy. The calories have been counted, the fat grams have been computed. You don't even have to think about nutrition. It's all in there. A shake for breakfast, 1 for lunch, a sensible dinner, even candy bars as snacks. So start today. By the time the weather heats up, you could look really hot. Ultra Slim Fast. Come on, start today. You could lose 10 pounds in a month.
this good cooking has been brought to you by the folks who practically invented breakfast, your International House of Pancakes. Nobody does breakfast like IHOP does breakfast.
Hey, sports fans, join your friends from IHOP at Yankee Stadium this year. Hurry down to your...
Thank you, Al, and I want to thank you and the outstanding shipmates for the fine job that you're doing. Mr. President, our entire Naval Service is thrilled to have you and the First Lady aboard the George Washington on this special day. 50 years ago, Allied vessels brimming with determined warriors, uncertain of their fate, but clear in their purpose, sailed across these very waters. Today, we honor them. They made the ultimate sacrifice then, so we can be free now. The Allied invasion plan was bold, joint, and dependent on the element of surprise. It was a day in which this plan, the Navy and Coast Guard's mission that day was to drive the Allied sword through the heart of the embattled Nazi wall and safeguard the assault from close ashore. It was a daunting task in the face of a fearsome enemy. Sailing across rough seas, the first Allied wave to approach Omaha Beach included 14 teams of U.S. Navy frogmen. Their mission, to breach the enemy's first line of defense. Their fate, to lose half their number that day. Their reward, to know that they created the 5 broad channels through which the liberators of Europe would pass. Wave after wave of brave American soldiers crashed through these hard-fought channels to reach Omaha Beach. At the same time, American, British, Canadian, and other Allied troops stormed the rest of the Normandy coastline. The ceiling of clouds disrupted the Allies' aerial bombardment, and the rough waters swamped the small craft bearing the Army's artillery. But the weather could do nothing to stop the roar of the guns from the mighty Allied ships of war. The destroyers, some so close to the shore that their keels were scraping the sandy bottom, fired relentlessly at their targets. Sadly, 2 of them, USS Corey and USS Meredith, rest eternally under the seas on which we now sail. By the end of the day, the wall of tyranny had been breached, but the price had been high. More than 2,000 men were killed or wounded that day, ensuring that democracy would be the hope of future generations. That night, after setting up headquarters on the beach, General Giroux sent a message back to General Bradley aboard USS Augusta. The message was brief, insightful, and still rings so true today. It said, "Thank God for the United States Navy." On behalf of the Department of the Navy, I welcome all our honored guests to the commemoration of the Allied invasion of Normandy. I am now pleased to introduce Dean Rockwell, who was awarded the Navy Cross for his heroic actions. He was a group commander of landing craft laden with Sherman tanks on this historic day 50 years ago. By ordering his group to nose directly onto the beach, then Lieutenant J.G. Rockwell saved the lives of hundreds of men whose tanks might otherwise have been swamped by the rough seas. Please welcome a true hero of Normandy, Dean Rockwell.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, honored guests. We of the U.S. Navy welcome you today as our Commander-in-Chief. You are a member of each of our country's armed forces, but this morning, we of the Navy have you to ourselves. Thank you, Mr. President. President Clinton, it was at about this same spot off Omaha Beach 50 years ago today, almost to the hour, I first saw the shore of Normandy through the murk and gloom of a stormy June morning, and it's remarkably the same again today 50 years later. We're now here to rededicate ourselves to the contributions made by the men and women of the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, Merchant Marines, with the aid and support of the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. It was an awe-inspiring armada of over 6,000 ships and naval craft that carried the men and material to the French shore. I was fortunate to have had a small but important part in both the preparation of and the landing at Omaha Beach. So did have some perception of the scope of the exercise called Neptune. But it was not until early afternoon of June the 5th, when we were on our way to Normandy, that the magnitude of the event hit me. The American invasion forces to Omaha and Utah Beach had been traveling east in the lee of the shores of England, and as we approached the Isle of Wight, we were joined by the other forces headed for Gold, Sword, and Juno beaches where the Canadian and English forces were landing. We came to about the Isle of Wight. Our force, the American force, turned right. The Canadian and English force turned left. The two columns traveled south, parallel toward France. It was a dreary day with rain, low clouds, a rough sea, and only short-range visibility. Suddenly, about 2 p.m., the clouds parted and the sun appeared briefly, but long enough for me to see ships, 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 all the way to the horizon. At that moment, the scope and magnitude and objective of the exercise hit me, and the die was cast. I knew there was no turning back at that stage. Today, we have the opportunity, yes, the responsibility, to remind the whole world that 1/2 century ago, Americans spearheaded a military invasion whose magnitude had never been done before, and it is unlikely to be ever to be equaled. And tens, yes, hundreds of thousands of men and women took part. Many, many, many gave their lives to bring freedom to the people of Europe and to enable all humanity to live in freedom. It is of the utmost importance, Mr. President, that we commemorate this date and event and not forget that what was done. We have a debt and an obligation to those 9,386 Americans who lie under the white Pentelic crosses and Stars of David in the cemetery above Omaha Beach, who paid the supreme sacrifice that we might be free and here today. We are, Mr. President, honored and delighted you have joined us here today. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce you to the other World War II veterans who have come for this special occasion. Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Delighted to have you here. Delighted to meet you. All yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rockwell, Mr. Secretary, Admiral, Captain Sprigg, chaplains, distinguished leaders of the Congress, the Cabinet, members of the Armed Services, veterans, family, and friends. This new and historically accurate dawn reminds us of that dawn 50 years ago that brought a new era, when thousands of warships assembled to begin Europe's liberation. Allied naval guns unleashed a storm of fire on Normandy's beaches as the sky brightened to a cold gray. Legions of young men packed into landing craft set out to take those beaches. After more than a year of brilliant planning by General Eisenhower and his Allied staff and those who were here even before, and one agonizing weather-caused delay, D-Day arrived at last exactly 50 years ago this day. We gather in the calm after sunrise today to remember that fateful morning, the pivot point of the war, perhaps the pivot point of the 20th century. But we should never forget that at this hour on June 6, 1944, victory seemed far from certain. The weather was menacing, the seas were churning, the enemy was dug in. Though the plans had been prepared in great detail, the chaos of battle can overwhelm the best laid plans, and for some of our units, the plans went awry. Indeed, General Eisenhower had already drafted a statement in case the operation did not succeed. As H hour approached, everyone in the invasion was forced to prepare in his own way. We know now from the records then that some soldiers and sailors woke to their wives back home or to children they had never even held. Some played dice, hoping for a string of good luck. Others tried to read, and many simply prayed. One Jewish officer, Captain Irving Gray, asked the chaplain on his landing craft to lead a prayer to the God in whom we all believe, whether Protestant or Catholic or Jew, that our mission might be accomplished and that we may be brought safely home again. Back home, as news of the invasion reached our fellow Americans, Americans spoke softly to God. In one Brooklyn shipyard, welders knelt down on the decks of their Liberty ship and said together the Lord's Prayer. The soldiers who landed on Utah and Omaha needed those prayers, for they entered a scene of terrible carnage. Thousands would never return. For those who did, it was faith in their Maker's mercy and their own ability that helped to carry the day. It was also raw courage and love of freedom and country. One of the most stirring tales of D-Day is that to which the Secretary of the Navy has already referred, the tale of the USS Corey. Ripped by mines while blasting enemy positions on Utah Beach, the Corey began to go under. But one man stayed aboard. He climbed the stern, removed the flag, and swam and scrambled to the main mast. There he ran up the flag, and as he swam off, our flag opened into the breeze. In the Corey's destruction, there was no defeat. Today, the wreckage of that ship lies directly beneath us, an unseen monument to those who helped to win this great war. 13 of the Corey's crew rest there as well, and these waters are forever sanctified by their sacrifice. 50 years ago, General Eisenhower concluded his order of the day with these words: "Let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking." As we begin this new day of remembrance, let us also ask God's blessing for all those who died for freedom 50 years ago, and for the Americans who carry on their noble work today. May God bless them, and may God bless America. . 。  . 。 . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . .
Joining the President and Mr. Rockwell are 4 distinguished veterans. Vice Admiral John Buckley, United States Navy, recipient of the Medal of Honor. Rear Admiral Thomas Patterson, United States Merchant Marine. Mr. Fred Schodish, United States Coast Guard. And Mr. Sidney Sisselman, United States Navy.